Have you ever heard a story that completely changed the way you see love and commitment? If this one touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow, we have another powerful story that you won't want to miss, one that could change the way you think about life, love, and second chances. Stay tuned, and see you in the next chapter. Ethan sat alone in his truck, gripping the steering wheel as he stared at the brightly lit house in front of him. It was his grandparents' home, the place where he had spent countless holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings. Tonight, it was filled with laughter, music, and celebration. His grandparents, George and Eleanor, were marking their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone that seemed almost impossible to him now. At 34 years old, Ethan felt like a failure. His marriage to Rachel, which had started with so much love and excitement, was now on the verge of collapse. Just 2 years ago, they had promised each other forever, surrounded by friends and family in a beautiful ceremony. But forever didn't seem so certain anymore. He sighed, running a hand through his short, dark hair, exhausted from yet another argument. This time, it had been over something trivial. Rachel had forgotten to pay a bill. It wasn't about the money, it was about responsibility, about feeling like he was the only one holding everything together. His frustration had boiled over, and harsh words had been exchanged. "You never think ahead, Rachel. I have to remind you about everything," he had snapped, his voice louder than he intended. "Oh, I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't realize you were perfect," she had shot back, slamming the bedroom door behind her. It was always like this. Small things turning into big things. Simple frustrations growing into resentment. He had never imagined marriage would be this hard. Ethan had always been the kind of guy who solved problems. As a mechanical engineer, he spent his days designing solutions, fixing things, making sure everything worked smoothly. But this, his marriage, felt like an unsolvable equation. No matter how hard he tried, nothing seemed to change. And now, he had made up his mind. This would be the last family event they attended as a couple. Tomorrow, he would talk to Rachel. They had no kids, no house to divide, nothing to tie them together except a love that had once burned brightly but now felt like fading embers. Maybe it was better to walk away before they destroyed each other completely. Rachel's voice echoed in his mind from earlier that evening. "Let's just pretend everything is okay tonight. We can't ruin your grandparents' celebration." Ethan had agreed. They would put on smiles, laugh at the right moments, and act as if they were still happy. But inside, he knew the truth. This was the beginning of the end. With a deep breath, he finally opened the truck door and stepped out. The cool evening air brushed against his face as he walked toward the house. Through the windows, he saw Rachel inside, smiling as she spoke to his cousins. She looked beautiful in her navy blue dress, her brown hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. For a moment, his heart ached. How had they ended up here? Pushing the thought aside, Ethan straightened his tie, put on his best fake smile, and stepped inside. Ethan stood near the back of the banquet hall, a glass of whiskey in his hand, barely listening to the conversations buzzing around him. Laughter filled the air, mixing with the soft hum of music and the clinking of silverware. His grandparents, George and Eleanor, sat at the front of the room, glowing with happiness as they celebrated 50 years of marriage. 50 years. The thought made his stomach tighten. How had they done it? He glanced across the room and spotted Rachel. She was laughing at something his cousin, Madison, had said, her green eyes shining under the warm light. To anyone else, she looked happy, effortlessly blending in with his family, just as she always had. But Ethan knew better. That was the same forced smile she had given him in the car earlier. "Let's just pretend everything is okay tonight." That had been the deal. A temporary truce for the sake of his grandparents. But as the night dragged on, Ethan felt the weight of their unspoken words pressing down on him. Tomorrow, it would all be over. Then, the sound of a microphone crackling brought his attention back to the stage. The pastor who had officiated his grandparents' wedding stepped forward, an old man with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Despite his frail appearance, his voice was steady and strong. "Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to stand here tonight, just as I did 50 years ago, when George and Eleanor vowed to walk this journey together." The room fell silent. Even the waitstaff paused as the old man spoke. Ethan shifted his weight, telling himself to stay polite, to wait it out. But something in the pastor's voice held him there. "Many young couples ask me, what's the secret to a long and happy marriage?" The pastor smiled. They expect a simple answer, a magic formula. But the truth is, there is no secret. There is only choice. Ethan felt a flicker of something in his chest. Romantic love, the kind that sweeps you off your feet, is beautiful. But it is not what keeps a marriage alive. What truly matters is decision love, choosing your partner every single day, even when it's hard. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Love is not a feeling. Feelings change. Passion fades. What keeps a couple together is the decision to stay. To work through the moments when love feels distant. To fight for each other when walking away seems easier. Ethan's grip tightened around his glass. He felt Rachel shift beside him. He hadn't even noticed her walk over. "Marriage is like a garden," the pastor continued. "You don't plant it once and expect it to thrive forever. You water it. You pull the weeds. You tend to it, even on the days when you don't feel like it. And one day, when the flowers bloom, you realize it was all worth it." Ethan swallowed hard. His mind raced back through the past year, every time he had ignored Rachel's efforts, every time he had chosen frustration over understanding, every time he had let resentment take root. For the first time in months, he felt something other than anger. He felt regret. The room erupted in applause, but Ethan barely heard it. The pastor's words echoed in his mind, as if they had been meant just for him. He turned his head, finally looking at Rachel. She was already looking at him. And in her eyes, he saw it, she had heard every word, too. Ethan stood frozen, the pastor's words replaying in his mind like an old song stuck on repeat. Love is not a feeling. Love is a choice. He had spent the last few months convinced that his marriage was beyond saving. That he and Rachel had grown too far apart, that their fights had stripped away every ounce of love they once had. But as he looked at her now, standing just a few feet away, he wasn't so sure anymore. Rachel's expression was unreadable, her lips pressed together, her eyes searching his, like she was trying to decide if he felt the same thing she did. Ethan's throat went dry. Did she? For the first time in months, he really saw her. Not just as the woman he had been arguing with. Not just as his wife who had forgotten to pay a bill, or left dishes in the sink, or sighed in frustration when he came home late from work. He saw Rachel. The woman he had fallen in love with. The woman who used to sneak love notes into his lunchbox when they were dating. The woman who had danced barefoot with him in their kitchen at midnight. The woman who, despite every fight, was still here. And the thought of losing her hit him like a punch to the chest. The applause from the speech had died down, and the guests had returned to their conversations. His grandparents, sitting at the front of the room, held hands and smiled at each other like they were still 20 years old. 50 years. How many arguments had they overcome? How many times had they chosen each other despite the hard days? Ethan realized something then. He had spent so much time focusing on what Rachel wasn't doing, what she had forgotten, what annoyed him, he had forgotten to see what she was doing. She was still trying. Still showing up. Still standing next to him, even now. His chest tightened with regret. How many times had she been waiting for him to fight for their marriage? How many nights had she laid in bed beside him, hoping he would just reach for her hand? Ethan swallowed hard, his heart pounding. It's not too late. Maybe their marriage wasn't as broken as he thought. Maybe they had just stopped watering their garden. And maybe, just maybe, it could still bloom again. Rachel shifted on her feet. "Ethan," she said softly. Her voice nearly knocked the air from his lungs. He hesitated for only a second before he took a step closer. "Can we talk? Outside?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Rachel searched his face for a moment, like she was trying to decide if he really meant it. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. As they walked toward the garden, the cool night air wrapped around them. Ethan took a deep breath. This was it. Maybe this was the beginning of the end. Or maybe, it was the start of something new. The cool night air wrapped around Ethan and Rachel as they stepped outside, leaving the noise of the banquet hall behind. The garden was dimly lit, the soft glow of string lights casting long shadows over the neatly trimmed hedges. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the distant hum of laughter from inside. But out here, it was quiet. Ethan stuffed his hands into his pockets, suddenly unsure of where to start. Where do you begin when you've spent months building walls between you? Rachel stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. She looked at him expectantly, waiting. He took a deep breath. "Rachel, he hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I've been so focused on everything going wrong between us that I stopped seeing you." Rachel blinked, her posture stiffening. "What do you mean?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "I mean, I've been keeping score. I've been counting the fights, the frustrations, all the little things that drive me crazy, instead of remembering why I married you in the first place." Rachel's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Ethan took a step closer. "Tonight, when the pastor was talking about love being a choice, I realized something." His voice was thick with emotion. "I haven't been choosing us. I've been choosing resentment. I've been choosing frustration. And I think I was ready to walk away because it felt easier than trying to fix what's broken." Rachel's eyes glistened under the dim light. She looked down for a moment, then let out a soft, shaky breath. "You weren't the only one, Ethan," she admitted. "I've been doing the same thing. I've been waiting for you to fix it instead of meeting you halfway." She looked up at him, her voice breaking slightly. "I was ready to give up, too." The words hit him hard, but he didn't feel anger. Instead, he felt relief. Because she still cared. Ethan reached out, hesitating for only a second before taking her hands in his. They were warm, familiar. The way they used to be before everything got so hard. "I don't want to lose you, Rach," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to walk away." Rachel let out a trembling laugh, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't want to walk away either." For the first time in months, the weight pressing down on his chest began to lift. They weren't fixed. Not yet. But they were standing in the same place, looking at each other, choosing each other. And maybe that was enough to start again. Ethan and Rachel stood there in the quiet garden, their fingers still intertwined, their hearts still racing. It felt strange, yet familiar, like stepping into a memory they had almost forgotten. For months, they had been drifting apart, two ships lost in a storm, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, they had found their way back to the same shore. Rachel sniffled, wiping a stray tear from her cheek, and let out a soft laugh. "So, what do we do now?" Ethan exhaled, his breath visible in the crisp night air. "We start over," he said simply. "We stop keeping score. We stop looking for what's wrong and start appreciating what's right." Rachel nodded slowly. "And when things get hard again?" Ethan squeezed her hands. "We remember this moment. We remember that love isn't just about feeling good, it's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard." Rachel looked down for a moment, then back up at him, something new shining in her eyes. Hope. That night, when they went home, they didn't go back to old habits. They didn't go to bed in silence, lying with their backs turned. Instead, they talked. Really talked. About everything, what had gone wrong, what they had ignored, what they needed from each other. It wasn't a magical fix. The tension didn't vanish overnight. There were still moments of frustration, still old patterns creeping back in. But this time, something was different. They were willing to fight for it. They started small. Ethan made a point to put his phone down when Rachel was talking, to be present, to actually listen. Rachel, in turn, made an effort to recognize Ethan's stress from work and support him instead of letting her own frustrations build up. They introduced little gestures they had forgotten, a kiss before work, a handwritten note left on the bathroom mirror, an unexpected coffee waiting on the counter. And every week, no matter how busy they were, they set aside one night just for them. No distractions. No work talk. Just them, rediscovering the reasons they fell in love in the first place. Some days were harder than others. There were still disagreements, still moments of exhaustion, but now, instead of letting those moments pull them apart, they leaned into each other. They fought for their marriage the way they should have from the start. Years later, as they celebrated their own 25th anniversary, Ethan looked at Rachel across the candlelit table. She was older now, but still beautiful, still the woman who had chosen to fight for them. And in that moment, he realized, every argument, every struggle, every time they had almost given up, it had all been worth it. Because love, true love, wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing someone, over and over again. And Ethan would choose Rachel every single time. This story is a powerful reminder that love isn't just about the good times, it's about choosing each other, even when things get tough. Have you ever faced a moment in your life where you had to decide whether to walk away or fight for something meaningful? Maybe in a relationship, a friendship, or even a personal challenge. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from and what part of this story resonated with you the most. Do you believe love is a choice, just like Ethan and Rachel learned? Or do you think relationships should always feel effortless? Let's start a conversation. Your experiences and insights might just help someone else who's going through something similar. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story like this. We've got something special coming tomorrow, you won't want to miss it.